All right. I know that you've clashed publicly with Ron DeSantis. What is something people would not believe about your political battles behind the scenes with him?
Yeah, I tried to prevent it. I think that's what most people need to understand. I really spent the better part of a year and 3 months trying to work together, whether it was agency head. We all took our first trade mission to the state of Israel. We joined forces on environmental issues. So really tried to, behind closed doors, prevent what was inevitably the breakdown of our relationship and the public seeing the clashing of the two of us on a pretty consistent basis.
Mm.
And I think the last like real was in 2020. People kept saying, in his ear, the people keep chattering, Nikki's going to run against you for governor. And so at some point, that his better angels went away and really shut me out from communication inside of the administration. In fact, in February of 2020, excuse me, that I reached out to him and called him personally and said, hey, there was at that time some legislation that was running through that was trying to strip some power away from the Commissioner of Agriculture's office that was being directed by his people.
Mm.
And I called and I said, hey, why don't you and I spend some time together? Because I think that a lot of this is miscommunication. I had not made any decisions about what I was doing next. In fact, was really focusing on my current job as Commissioner of Agriculture.
Mm.
And I called him. He said, yeah, just have my team, you have your staff call my staff and let's get a meeting set up together. And so my staff did do that, reached out and asked, hey, can the two of them sit down? And his team said, for what purpose? And they said, they're two members of the Florida cabinet. They don't need an actual purpose. And that was the last time. And the staff never put in a meeting on the books. During the beginning part of COVID, I reached out to him on three separate occasions, his chief of staff on three separate occasions, trying to again say, look, we are in this together. We might be D versus R on policy, but we're about to have a healthcare crisis and we don't know what's coming next. We should govern together. Like this is
Yeah.
something important that half of the state, trusts me and the other half trusts you. And having another opinion in the conversations and us coming out as a united front. And I couldn't get anybody on the phone. And so
Do
it
you think
ended
he's
up.
just surrounded by tough people that just don't get it? I mean, what do you think of him as a person, I guess?
Oh, as a person, I think I've said a lot of public things about how bad of a person he is. I truly believe in his heart that he has none. I saw that up close and personal. I really thought at the beginning, I started seeing him come to positions that I had advocated for in the campaign. The pardoning of what the Groveland Four, which was four Black men who 70 years ago had been wrongfully accused of raping a young woman. And I had pushed for them to be exonerated, to be pardoned. And he came to me on the first clemency meeting and made that happen. Talked about smokable flour that had been through lawsuits. He came to my position, dropped the lawsuit with John Morgan and Matt Gaetz on camera together.
Mm.
Strange bedfellows on cannabis again. And so I really thought that there was an opportunity. And then as I started spending more and more time with him and watching him, I realized very quickly that this has nothing to do with the best interests of the people of our state. This was, I think that the Heritage Foundation, I got a hold of him pretty quickly in his career and pushed him into a direction of, hey, we're going to make you president of the United States. Here's the blueprint. And,
Yeah.
and I think that he was so ambitious to want to become president that everything else, whatever potential human decency was there, was gone.
It's interesting. I moved to Florida I guess it was 2 years ago now, but as I was, I lived in New York at the time. And the first time like politics in Florida really became something I paid attention to was the Don't Say Gay bill or whatever that's called.
Yep.
Is that what it's called?
Yeah. Don't say gay. Yeah.
Yeah. And he was part of that, correct?
Oh, yes. He was pushing
Yeah.
it.
So, and I was always like, that is like, why? Like, why are we talking about that? Why is that a bill? And I feel like it gave Florida such um, there was so many misconceptions with that, but it gave it such a bad name, right? But then, like, I'll hear I'm really into animals. And, I hear that he passed this law. I think it's called Tucker's Law about no dog can be left behind or whatever. So then all of a sudden, people recently I saw where they were like, oh, DeSantis, we love you. So there's things on the opposite sides. And I was like, what kind of a guy is this? Like that's what I just couldn't understand.
Yeah, and I think that interesting, like the animal bill, he didn't push it, he just signed it.
Got it.
So like as a so sure, there's a lot of great things that he has signed because the
Yeah.
legislature passed it,
Yeah.
and but the Don't Say Gay bill, the attacks, the cultural war attacks came solely from Ron DeSantis. And I do believe if you even see on Project 2025, a lot of that is the dehumanization of groups of people that I just can't wrap my brain around,
Yeah.
and the anger that goes associated with it didn't make any sense. Sure, there's going to be bad actors in every industry, whether it is teachers, construction, development, you name the industry, they're going to be bad actors,
Of
but you
course.
don't put laws into place that harm everybody
Mm,
because of certain bad actors.
I
Yeah,
totally agree.
but his he didn't care. He just this is Florida where woke went to die. And I think that has created such divisiveness that also put Florida Democrats in a really weird, uncomfortable spot because our human nature is to defend everybody around us. That is just our human nature. That's why we chose to become Democrats in a lot of respects.
Right.
And so we're put into a position in a war that we didn't start. But of course, when you attack one of us, you attack all of us. And that has always been like at least my living motto. And so you force us into a position to defend a large marginalized communities. And then we were attacked for doing that.
Mm,
And pretending that we couldn't walk and chew gum at the same time. Of course, we can protect our LGBTQ plus community at the same time when we're fighting for economic opportunities and property insurance reductions and cost of living.
yeah.
And unfortunately, Republicans pushed us into a corner and didn't let us have any breathing room to talk about the other issues.
Right. Right. You're now the chair of the Florida Democratic Party. What does that role really look like day to day? And what are some of the challenges you're facing?
Every day is a little bit different, but it starts off really early, taking probably the first phone calls as we have no statewide elected Democrat in the state of Florida, super minority in both chambers. A lot comes to us as the party
Mhm.
for messaging, for strategy, for fundraising, for recruiting of candidates. For dealing with issues between our local party chapters. And because the Democratic Party has always been this tremendously large tent, which means that Democrats underneath the tent are going to be all types of spectrums inside of there. And trying to make sure that there's respect under the tent is definitely one of the greatest challenges. That, somebody who may be more left leaning on policy, being able to be in the same room, in the same conversation as some of our more moderate Democrats on the spectrum.
Mm.
One other big aspect of things that is a challenge here in Florida is that people have written us off. National donors, national conversation is, Florida's too red and too gone. And
Mm.
that's just not reality. First of all, there's 22 million people here. There's only 15 million that are registered, which means 8 million people that call Florida home are not registered to vote here. One third is Republican, one third is Democrat, one third is independent. But without the resources into infrastructure, I don't want to talk about the 26 campaigns. I don't want to talk about the presidential campaigns. If you don't put money into infrastructure and political parties, no candidate can be successful in a general election. And so trying to tell the Florida story that we might be down, we might be considered underdogs, but the fight is real.
Right.
That the communities that we are building into this coalition is real. And we need people to understand that if we want democracy to be stabilized for generations to come, Florida can't be written off. We're too large, too diverse, too many issues come from Florida. You have to make sure that we're truly invested and organized in our state.
So now that you brought that up, what are your thoughts on Elon Musk and his push for a new American political party?
Look, I want to take two kind of lanes on here. First of all, like it's Elon having a temper tantrum. All of his money just got, stripped out of all of his tax rebates
Yeah.
in his electric vehicles and solar and all the things that he was moving forward from the federal government. He is the largest recipient of federal dollars than any other corporation or individual in the federal government
Hmm.
between his grants for Tesla to SpaceX and every other business enterprise he's undergone. So one, he's having a temper tantrum. Two, I think there's also take a step back. There's a problem with the party system.
Hmm.
Most of Americans, and I actually was reading an article today, most Americans think the party system and structure is broken. And I don't disagree. That we can't just be listening to the people that are devout in one party. I don't care if it's just Democrat or kind of Republican, that the party structure is not allowing, those that are independent, which is now a growing population, not just here in Florida, but the entire United States.
Hmm.
Younger generations are becoming independent. More Black and brown men are becoming more independent. And so we, as party leaders, have to listen to something's happening in American politics, and more people are distrusting of the party system. And so the first party to hear that and to move more into the center, and I don't mean center policy wise, but center as far as like taking more of the coalition with us, is going to be the party that is going to survive whatever this moment in American history is.
Right, right. Um, I want to talk about Alligator Alcatraz. Everybody's talking about it right now. Clarify for me, this just opened, right?
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Just opened last week.
Can you explain to people that are listening that maybe live in Florida, maybe don't live in Florida, if they are not clear what it is, can you explain what it is and what's happening with it?
Yeah. So this is the worst grift and corruption that we have seen actually in the state of Florida. So in 2023, Ron DeSantis signed an executive order that gives him complete power. Executive orders, emergency executive orders is because there's an emergency, which means 911 at that moment. He
Mhm.
signed it in regards to, at that point, boats of Haitians and Cubans that were leaving Haiti and Cuba because of uprisings in gang violence in Haiti, and because of revolutionary activities that were happening in Cuba. And so he created an emergency order that has now been extended 15 times. So state of Florida is still underneath an emergency order. This gave him complete power to take land from the Miami-Dade County as well as Collier County to create a detention center in the middle of the Florida Everglades.
Mhm.
So he did this without legislative approval, without environmental impacts, which now we have both the Miccosukee as well as the Seminoles, who are the Native Americans here in the state of Florida. This is their tribal land. This is where their ancestors are buried. This is their land, and it had been coming out and talking about the environmental disaster. So then he allocated $450 million. Again, because he doesn't have to go to the legislature because he's operating under an emergency order. And he has now given out no bid contracts to all of his Republican donors in the state of Florida with no oversight, and is building this detention center in the middle of the Florida Everglades, which already we have seen 5 of our Florida legislators, Democratic legislators, show up, refused to get an actual tour of the location, saying it was unsafe, even though the president was there literally the day before. Then you have already reports coming out that the first detainees are there, that are showing huge insects and bugs. And as past commissioner of agriculture, that's also one of my responsibilities, is making sure that insects and owls, that conversation of how to get in front of that isn't working. I mean, you're living in, the temperature.
Well, hold on one second because you're
On
frozen. And I want to hear your answer for this. George, tell me when she's back with the full bars.
I got you.
I
Okay.
think I froze.
Yeah, yeah. Because I want to hear that whole answer
Yeah.
again.
You want me to start over?
No, well, hang on. George, tell me when she's ready.
Yeah, we are back at yellow bars. Just give it one sec here. And Alrighty.
It started falling off when you were talking about the conditions in there.
Okay.
But I guess as you're talking about the conditions, I'm also curious, like, because obviously the media will be like, well, these are lies. You don't know what it's really like in there. So how are we getting the reports of what the conditions are if no one's really allowed to go in there and see what it looks like?
Yeah, and what we're already seeing is one, again, our legislators were not allowed in there to inspect the conditions of it. We
Mhm.
already saw that in a very small South Florida summer thunderstorm, leaking happening on the floor of this building.
Mhm.
And then now we're getting reports, and it's self-reporting reports because we can't get people access inside of the detention center.
Right.
We have no eyeballs in there. There's no cameras. There's nothing. There, as an attorney, you can walk into a jail. As an elected official, you can walk into our jails and our prisons. As members of Congress, you can walk into detention, federally regulated detention centers. We don't have any of that. All we're getting is reports from the people that are inside of there, saying that there is huge bugs, that the showers aren't working, the toilets aren't working, the air conditioning isn't working. In fact, within the last 24 hours, we're even hearing ambulances showing up, that people are having to be taken out of there. We don't know the condition of the individual. We don't know any of that. The Miami-Dade mayor, who happens to be a Democrat, wrote a letter both to the feds, which is a whole nother situation, because now the feds, the people of a great state of Florida thought that they were getting reimbursed from FEMA dollars, are now being told that that's not the case, that the Trump administration never promised those dollars, and they may not be coming. So Florida and the Florida citizens are on the hook for this $450 million right now,
Right.
with no ability to make sure the people that are inside of there are at least being treated in human conditions. And the Republican Party of Florida are selling merch about this. Department of Homeland Security are making cute little memes with alligators with ice hats on it. We're talking about human beings, and a vast majority of these human beings that are being put there are people that have been living here for 10, 20, 30 years, that were on temporary protection status or parolee status, that had paperwork, that were going to their court hearings, not criminals, not gang members, not these people that were described by Trump during the campaign or first part of this administration. They don't have enough people on their 3,000 a day Miller quotas, and so they're going after everyday people that are showing up to work, whether it is in the tourism industry, the agriculture industry, the construction industry, and it will eventually decimate Florida's economy even greater.